Good evening and welcome to Q&A. And facing your questions tonight, Brisbane's rebel priest, Father Peter Kennedy, sacked by the Catholic Church for his unorthodox practices. The youthful Minister for Youth and Sport, Kate Ellis. Fairfax Media's Director of Corporate Affairs, Bruce Walpy. Social commentator and author of The Sex Diaries, Bettina Arndt. And the Shadow Minister for Families and Community Services, Tony Abbott. Please welcome our panel. All right. OK, that dusty old adage says we should avoid talking about three things: sex, politics and religion. But I know from the questions already in hand that we'll be talking about all three tonight here on Q&A. Well, there still may be time for you to consider your questions. Q&A is live on the web from 9:25 Eastern Summer Time. You can send your questions on the web at abc.net.au/Q&A Quanda, or by SMS to 197 55222. But our first question tonight comes from in the audience, and it's from Richard Purvis.
OK, thanks, Tony. I'd direct this to both the federal politicians here. As a teacher who's heavily involved in student welfare, the culture of alcohol, in particular binge drinking, is something that I and my colleagues confront on a regular basis. Why can't our federal politicians work together to combat a social evil rather than politicise an issue that is destroying many young lives and tearing families apart?
Let's hear from our non-politicians first, if we can. Bruce Walpy.
Well, I just think that these things are very difficult to deal with. People are grappling with them all the time. But I think I'd like to hear from the politicians on this as well.
Look, an epidemic of buck passing, if not binge drinking. But I wonder why we think it is the government's job or the politicians' job to sort this out. It obviously is a problem, no doubt about that at all, and as the father of three daughters, I am concerned about this. But in the end, teachers, parents, all authority figures, not just politicians, have a role. And I suppose in the end, it's good example. It's clean living generally, which is going to make a difference, rather than whacking on new taxes here, putting advertising campaigns there, and pious exhortations alone. So I think we've all got a job to do here.
Now, Tony, are you saying that governments have no role in this? Because this could come back to bite you. I mean, the Minister for Health is already talking about Malco Pops, the cheap drinks that young women will be drinking from now on.
Yeah, but Tony, that is a really cheap political smear, and this attempt to attack people's integrity on the basis of whether they're for or against a tax, whether they're for or against a tax, I think that's the kind of political argy-bargy which understandably gives all politicians a bad name. It's just a bit low, and it shouldn't happen.
Bruce?
Yeah, it's not just an issue in Australia. In France, they're debating under Sarkozy of raising the drinking age from 16 to 18. In France, a country which has been accustomed for children, teenagers drinking wine with their families and so forth, and that culture seems to be breaking down, so that the same tensions that we see with binge drinking here are worldwide. So I do think if you look at just the numbers of people outside pubs on a Friday night and how much is being, you just wonder whether we really do have a problem.
Bettina Arndt.
We do have a problem, there's no question. I too have raised three teenagers. And there's a very real issue with binge drinking, but I do think we need to look at issues like tax. But not just taxing alcohol pops, but taxing all alcohol on the basis of its alcohol content. And that is what the evidence apparently seems to show is really the way to go in terms of having an impact here. And the alcohol, just going for the alcohol pops to me was just a token money grab. When so many kids, I've seen my own kids' friends walking down the streets with a bottle of vodka now, whereas they used to drink these, horrible lolly water things. But I think there is a real worry there that you're just shifting the alcohol content into something where they're going to get into even more trouble.
Kate Ellis.
Well, can I get back to the question, which was why can't both sides of politics work together on this, and say that I really wish that we could. But the opposition has shown this week that they're not prepared to get on board and back some of these measures. But despite that, we're acting. We agree that this is a really serious issue, which is why we've got the $53 million binge drinking strategy. And, I mean, it's really unfortunate what happened this week. I don't think anybody benefits from having cheaper Alcopops out there, particularly when they know that they are the drink of choice for vast percentages of those teenagers that are drinking at risk.
Peter Kennedy.
Well, Tony, I guess the culture itself, advertises in sports people and sports programs that alcohol is something that we should imbibe as frequently as we like. I think, in other words, the culture encourages the binge drinking, really.
OK, well, we know what's happened in the Senate is that this Alcopops tax has been blocked. There appears to be a lot of anger directed at those who blocked it in the emails that we've been seeing, at least. Now, there's a fair bit of anger, and we're getting questions on the web like this one from Samuel Di Giovanni from Briar Hill in Victoria. What type of democracy do we have when an independent senator who received some 50,000 votes ends up having more power than the elected government of the day? And another one from Catherine McHenry in Hadspen, Tasmania. As a mother of 3 young girls and someone who would normally support independent senators, I feel betrayed by Steve Fielding. Tough when we seem to have an opposition that does nothing but oppose. Tony Abbott.
Well, in the end, our job is to hold the government to account. And, Tony, the view we took was that this was a tax grab. It wasn't about health. And if it had really been about health, all of the revenue, or most of the revenue, would have gone into health measures of one sort or another.
Just on the logic of that, do you want to take the tax off cigarettes? Because doesn't that work? You were the health minister. You wouldn't take the tax off cigarettes when you were health minister.
That's a fair point. But, by the same logic, we would increase the tax on all alcohol, and we would gradually increase the tax on all alcohol to the point where it was prohibitive. So, look, a foolish consistency is a hobgoblin for tiny minds, as they say, Tony. But
it's the kids, it's the kids that are most susceptible to an increase in the cost of alcohol. And they're the ones we would get at by putting it across the board.
Yeah, but the point you make, Bettina, is that the Alcopops become more expensive, and the Alcopops are about 5 to 7% by volume of alcohol. So what are they doing? They're buying bottles of vodka and they're swigging the bottles of vodka. And that, in the end, is, I think, more damaging to your health than certainly the same quantity of Alcopops.
Let me bring Kate Ellis back in, and we've actually got a question from the floor. I'll come to you in a second. But Kate Ellis, Steve Fielding essentially wanted a ban on all alcohol advertising in sport. If you'd have been able to give him that, he would have voted for this tax and you would have got it through. In principle, do you agree that that's a good idea?
Well, you probably won't be surprised to know that as the Sports Minister, I have some pretty key concerns about what happens when you remove $1.25 billion out of sports funding each year. And to be honest with you, my personal view is that is an overly simplistic response to what is a really complicated issue of binge drinking. I don't think that solves the issue, and I don't think that when you have a look at the impacts of taking that amount of funding out and what that has on community clubs. A lot of these community clubs rely upon alcohol sponsorship, but also when you have a look at our professional sports, a large amount of the money that they get through their sponsorship is put into their junior programs, is put into getting kids active and out there, which ultimately is very good for the health system. So I think it is an overly simplistic response.
And Kate, that's exactly the point. It is a complex problem, and this idea that just by increasing the tax on Alcopops we're going to solve the problem is foolish, I think.
Well, can I just respond and say that nobody's saying that Alcopops on its own is going to address this issue. That's why we're talking about a comprehensive strategy. That's why we've released already the measures that we're putting in place with our sporting clubs. That's why we're talking about our advertising campaigns. That's why we're talking to young people about what it is that we need to do. But we don't gain anything from making Alcopops cheaper.
What about the other types of alcohol?
Well, Tony was talking about consistency. Let's talk about consistency in the tax that is currently applied. At the moment, there is a loophole in place that means that if I go out and buy a pre-mixed vodka and lemonade, I'm paying less tax than if I go out and buy a bottle of vodka and a bottle of lemonade and mix it. That doesn't make any sense.
Quick thought. You're about to give $300 million back to the alcohol industry. Why not use that money and don't give it back to them? give it to sporting clubs and teams that are prepared to give up their alcohol advertising. $300 million, a lot of money. You might encourage some of them to stop doing it.
Well, absolutely. And what we saw, and a part of the deal that we managed to come to with the Greens and with Nick Xenophon, was actually along those lines, was $50 million, which would have gone towards community clubs and sporting organisations so that they could transfer their sponsorship.
But
sadly, the opposition and Steve Fielding voted this down.
You want to work with us. We don't want to give the $300 million back. We're happy to see the $300 million go to a good purpose. I think we would be prepared to support the suggestion that Tony's just made. So come on, work with us and let's do it.
I do want to work with you, Tony, which is why I'm trying to talk to you about consistency.
Yeah, but you didn't actually answer the question. What about the $300 million? Why not use it for a good purpose rather than give it back to the alcohol industry?
Well, certainly what we've said...
Because they're saying they'll vote for that and you'll be able to do it.
What we've said is that with the Alcopops measure, if that was passed by the Senate, then there would be flow-on benefits into preventative health.
What about the $300 million?
Well, there is...
You don't want to use it for good?
No, what I'm saying is I think it's nonsensical to say that we'll take this tax, we'll use it for good for 1 year, but then we won't going forward. We're saying you need a consistent argument, and that's why we think that we should be doing that well into the future, not making Alcopops cheaper.
OK, let's hear from the gentleman who had his hand up a moment ago.
OK, so if the government's serious about actually reducing binge drinking among youths, then why can I buy 4 litres of cask wine for $10? Why can I buy a bottle of vodka for $30 or even less? And why not automatically straight away implement a raised tax on all alcohol rather than just Alcopops if you're serious about combating binge drinking among youths?
Bettina Arndt's question essentially, why not?
Well, I guess there's a couple of issues there. One is that at the moment there is a clear inconsistency and loophole in the taxation arrangements as they exist. But the second one is that, frankly, we have a lot of young people here. I don't know whether you want to fess up to your drinking habits on national television, but we have seen from studies that young people between the ages of 14 and 19 who are drinking at risk, of those at-risk drinkers, 75% of females in that category choose Alcopops of their drink of choice, and 64% of young males, 14 to 19, who are drinking at risk, prefer Alcopops. There is clearly an issue with this particular sort of alcohol, and that's what we're trying to address as part of a comprehensive strategy.
All right, we've got another question. Just hang on, we've got another question in the middle here.
It's interesting Kate talks about consistency, but you have no consistency when it comes to relying on this money from advertising. You're talking about $1 billion from the alcohol industry. You're also probably getting at least that from the fast food industry, and there's no surprise, therefore, that we have a problem with alcohol in teenage communities and obesity rife in Australia. Can't you look at this, holistically and consistently?
Well, we can. First of all, can I say that what the government has said about the alcohol advertising and sport is that this is a huge measure, what Senator Fielding was proposing, and it's the sort of measure that if you're going to look at and look at the effect that it has on a number of different industries, on the sporting industry, on the media industry, you want to do that properly and you want to take the time to do that. You don't want to tack it on to legislation that you're trying to get passed as part of a deal. And so obviously, as the sports minister, I'm going to have some key concerns about, I think this is about balance. I don't think it's about, I think it's about saying that if you're going to drink responsibly, but I think it's part of the debate that we need to look at what would happen to Australia's sporting system if you all of a sudden ripped out $1.25 billion out of the sports system. Because I have to say, I think sport is part of the solution.
You just gave $21 billion out in cash.
Well, I have to say that I think that sport is part of the solution.
The sport is absolutely part of the solution, and I've got two kids that can't get to enough playing fields around the northern beaches. It's very hard to, all the playing fields are full all the time, and there isn't enough space, there isn't enough funding for grassroots sport. So I'm fully on side with getting funding. I just wish some of it had been better directed.
OK, we'll take that as a comment and I'm going to move on. Now remember that Q&A is live and it's interactive. Send us your question via SMS at 1975522 or go to our website at abc.net.au/Q&A to send us a message or even a video question, like this one from Barry Donaghy from Arundel in Queensland.
My questions are directed to Father Peter. Father, aren't you having two bob each way by turning your back on Orthodox Catholic practice while continuing to occupy the position of parish priest at St Mary's? haven't you hijacked the resources at St Mary's to prosecute your own agenda? And wouldn't the honourable course of action be for you to vacate St Mary's and establish your church with those who want to follow you at another venue?
Peter Kennedy.
Barry, was it?
It was Barry.
Barry. Well, if Barry, the reality is that I've been at St Mary's for 28 years, and it's an unusual community. It's not like a normal parish. People come from all over the city because of the liturgy that we celebrate there, which undergirds our work with the homeless and the poor and the excluded. So it's a very special community which has taken many years to develop to this point in time. We have micro projects, for example, which came out of the community 15 years ago. It's funded by government to about 10 million. We give about $40,000 a year to that micro projects. And you see, it's like one is embedded there, if I can put it that way. Like, it's not easy just to shift, to move on. And I feel that what's happened by my sacking is that it's been a very unjust move on the part of the Archbishop.
Peter, let's for the national audience who aren't so familiar with your case, just tell us what you're accused of and why you were sacked. At least give us a couple of the incidents or the things that have been alleged against you.
Well, the people that came in were not part of our community at all, and they came in uninvited and arrogantly took photographs of our books and our literature, and they sent them off to Rome. Now, these people are ultra-Orthodox Catholics, and then without any trial, if you like, or any sort of a juridical process, I was just accused of breaking, basically just innovating, if you like, liturgical changes.
One of the things you were accused of is blessing homosexuals, accommodating gay and lesbian choir on church property. They're two of the so-called crimes. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the gay and lesbian choir in Brisbane have been practising in our church community for about 15 years. Other groups use the church as well. Yes, there have been blessings of gay and lesbian people, not many, but the blessing usually is a gathering together of their family and friends and just being with them in this sort of a ceremony. Very happy to do that because it's one of the terrible things that the church does. It excludes people who are gay and lesbian. They don't, as long as you remain celibate, it's okay to be gay and lesbian. But if you enter into an intimate relationship, whether you're lesbian or gay guys, then that is sinful in the eyes of the church.
Okay, let's hear from some of our other panellists. And Tony Abbott, you're a conservative Catholic. You're a conservative Catholic. Your thoughts on this story?
Well, look, I can fully understand why an established congregation is unsettled when newcomers of a different orientation come in and object to the way things are being done. I can fully understand that. And look, I have a lot of sympathy with Father Kennedy's position, but it seems to me that when a parish priest picks a fight with an archbishop, it's a bit like a backbencher picking a fight with a party leader. Sure, you get a lot of public sympathy, but in the end, it is an organisation. It's got to have discipline. It's got to have rules. And I've got to say, Father, if you'd asked me for advice, I would have said adopt a sort of don't ask, don't tell policy about all of these things, because that way you can do your good work as you see it without necessarily causing offence or affront to more conservative
And Tony,
people.
we tried that. We kept under the radar all these years. But this ultra-Orthodox crowd have been going around to lots of parishes, you see, and seeing it in their right to Rome, and we never exported our stuff.
Okay,
let's hear from Tony. Let's hear from Kate Ellis.
Well, Well, I don't think it's my job to be getting in the middle of internal debates within the Catholic Church, but I would say that, I think that whilst there are some very strict teachings of the Catholic Church, it's my view that the followers of the Catholic Church right around the world are a much broader church than that. And I guess the ongoing debate is going to be, how does the Church accommodate that, and where do you draw the line before you're deemed to have crossed it and gone outside of the Catholic family? And I think that's probably been a long-running debate.
OK, there are quite a few people with their hands up, and I'll try and get to some of them in a moment. First, we do have another question from the audience. It comes from Lucy Smith.
Hi, my question is for Father Kennedy. Hi, Father. I was just wondering whether you thought that Jesus was lying when he said he was God and gave us his church, or maybe he was deliberately deceiving us, knowing that many of us would take much of what he said quite literally.
Well, Lucy,
I gather you heard the question. Essentially, it boils down to, is Jesus God?
Well, Lucy, Jesus was a Jew, and it would have been the utmost blasphemy for a Jew to say that he or she was God. It wasn't, the first 300 years of Christianity, it was all sorts of beliefs about Jesus. It wasn't
so
until...
he wasn't God?
Well, there were all sorts of understandings of Jesus. Nothing is said in the first three Gospels, which were written 40, 50, 60 years later. Nothing there to say that Jesus is the Son of God.
But Jesus said it?
No. Jesus,
didn't.
that would have been utter blasphemy for a Jew to say that about himself.
Let's hear from Tony Abbott.
Well, look, Father, again, I defer to your knowledge of Scripture and theology, but Jesus did make big claims for himself. He did make big claims, and certainly in all the subsequent centuries, the Church has made very big claims. Now, I think, we either play by the rules or we go off and do our good works, but outside the team, in a sense. And I think this is the challenge, and it's a very painful challenge, I think, for those of us who chafe sometimes under the rules of the institutional church. But Tony, I think that's the situation we're in.
Yeah, well, Tony, it depends on your model of church. You see, the Archbishop has the same model, like it's a club, and you keep the rules and everything's fine. But Vatican II came along and talked about a model of church being the people of God. And like someone, I don't know if it was John the 23rd or not, but unless the church falls into the hands of the people, it's not going anywhere.
But they still have a shepherd, and the bishop is, in a sense, the shepherd, the leader.
We don't have any say about that.
Can I interrupt you with a question, a brief one, really? But if you do get thrown out, you've actually taken legal action today against the Archbishop to try and stay in your parish, but if you get thrown out, because the law often ends up on the side of the church, will you take your church somewhere else?
Well, we actually have gone to Rome itself. We've asked for the sacking to be revoked on the grounds that the accusations were never tested. So we're waiting on that from the congregation of the clergy and also the congregation of the laity. So that will play out too.
All right,
but I really think it's important to make that point, that the Church, in Vatican II terms, is the people of God. And like, people can throw you out of office, Tony, but we have no say about electing our bishop, and we can't throw him out. It's a very hierarchical institution.
It always has been.
I know,
always will be.
No, it hasn't always been like that. First 3 centuries of the Church's existence, different communities were governed in different ways. Yeah. Okay. This is the Constantinian Church.
I'm going to interrupt both of you because we've actually got a couple of hands up. And before we get to our next question, I'd just like to hear from this person down the front who's had a hand up for a while.
Father Kennedy, I'm wondering if you have the same concerns as I do, raised as a Catholic, with the Pope this week saying abstinence is the only way to solve the AIDS problem in Africa, when we're looking at up to 1 in 3 people being infected and losing a whole continent with the infection rate.
We actually, before you answer that, let's go to a video question because it picks up some of the points that you've just made. It's a video question on a similar issue, and it comes from Anne Carl Lambert from Canberra.
Hi, I'm Anne Elizabeth Therese Carl Lambert, and you get no points for guessing my religion. As I fast approach my maker because I have a terminal lung disease, I worry especially about the young and their ability to rely on their religion for it to give them hope and guidance in the future in their complicated lives. As an example, I draw to your attention the 11-year-old Brazilian girl who was recently raped by her stepfather. The Pope excommunicated the 2 doctors who performed the termination on this girl, and he excommunicated the girl as well, but not the stepfather. Am I right to be worried, do you think, about our young and their ability to rely on their religion? I am quite pessimistic about this, and other than praying, can we look at some practical way of restoring hope to our young in their religion? I'd especially like to hear from Father Peter Kennedy and Tony Abbott, but the other panellists as well. Thank you.
Okay, before I throw it to Peter Kennedy... Before I throw it to Peter Kennedy, a small correction there. The girl's mother was excommunicated, not the girl, but the question still stands and the relevance of it as well. So, Peter Kennedy.
Well, Tony, I think that the church really is so wrong about its teaching on sex. And one of the reasons that it is that is because women are excluded from any say in the teaching authority of the church. It's just amazing if you think about it, that women have no say in the teaching of the Catholic Church. It's all unmarried men who are talking about women's issues like contraception, like abortion. If women were part of the magisterium, and that's what must happen actually, the church must become a democracy. It has to come that way. It's operating as a monarchy, as a totalitarian state, really, within liberal democracies. It cannot survive. The reality is that most of these young people here, if they were Catholic, they would not be going to their normal parishes. Something like 95% of young people who go to Catholic schools just leave. They leave the church. Like 85% of people who put their names down as Catholic on the census form, they are what I call recovering Catholics, recovering from Catholicism. But I too believe, until women have a say in the teaching authority of the church, these issues like abortion, issues like contraception, issues like this lady is talking about here, nothing's going to change.
Let's hear from a woman, Kate Ellis.
Oh, thanks, Tony.
It's a great pleasure.
Well, yes. What can I say? Look,
you can only agree with me.
Well, I'm going to try and steer well away from what you just put forward. Indeed.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let me help define your answer, because that video question referred to the Brazilian case, the excommunicated doctors who did the abortion, the mother, etc., etc. What the Archbishop in Brazil said, who excommunicated those people, was that abortion is a greater crime than rape. In this case, a greater crime than the rape of a 9-year-old girl. Your view?
Well, it'll be of no surprise to you that I completely disagree with those views. I think that those views are appalling, and obviously we have great sympathy for the girl that was involved in this. I also think it's people's right to have their religious beliefs and to have their faith, no matter how much I might disagree with that. But I have to say that I know how hard people work, the people that work with victims of sexual assault, and I know how hard they work to try and encourage people to speak out and to get help. And as such, I can understand just how frustrating it is when these things occur.
Tony Abbott.
Look, it's a horrible situation, this Brazilian situation, just gruesome. And I think it is an overly rigorous position that the Brazilian bishop has taken. Having said that, I think the whole thing is a tragedy. I mean, the rape was a crime, and everything that's happened after that is a terrible tragedy. But we should not judge and damn a religion based just on a couple of really badly handled situations.
Okay, would you agree, well, just before I bring you in, Bettina, would you agree that the other questioner who raised the issue of the Pope suggesting that AIDS is actually increased by the use of condoms in Africa, that is actually quite a dangerous thing to say?
If people are going to do the wrong thing, in inverted commas, I think it's sensible to mitigate against the danger and the damages, but you'd like to think that people would do the right thing.
That was such a politician's answer. Let's hear from a non-politician, Bettina Rudd.
I mean, I'm rather pessimistic about Peter, about the possibility of change within the Catholic Church, having spent all my adult life listening to various ludicrous pronouncements by a series of popes, particularly on issues to do with sexuality, on issues to do with contraception, and I see very little sign of change. And one of the real reasons that I think a lot of people are losing faith in the Church, of course, is the way the Church has conducted itself in relation to sexuality, and particularly sexual abuse and covering up of sexual abuse by members of the clergy, and that is a very real issue that is undermining people's faith in the Church.
Bruce Walpy, let's hear from you. And I should make the point here, I don't think they have excommunication in the Jewish faith.
They do not have excommunication in the Jewish faith. And there were two phrases that I heard. You know, you said you're never outside the team. Either you're in the team or outside the team. In the Jewish religion, you're never outside the team. You're Jewish by your mother's, by being born of a Jewish mother or by conversion or whatever. And it's not hierarchical like the Catholic Church. So there's more flexibility. But
so
I really
this
agree.
Is a better church for
but I really agree with Kate.
But women don't always get a very good run.
No, and those things have to be mediated through your religious beliefs and the institutions. But I agree with Kate. People have to find faith where they find it. The problem that I have is when religious ideology is transmitted into political theology, and where the state and church converge, and the state becomes an instrument of the church. That's where I think, in a democracy, a modern Western democracy...
Is that what you think the Pope has done by interjecting himself into the whole issue in Africa?
The Pope can interject, but I expect you as a Catholic politician not to be a Catholic first and a politician second, but to be a political leader for all Australians.
And are you accusing me of being that, Bruce?
No, sir.
Well, why did you raise it then?
Because I think these issues are, how do you regulate people, or what kind of laws do you have in society based on religious belief? So is abortion legal?
And effectively, it is in Australia.
That's right.
And I would... I would I think it would be very wrong for a politician in a secular democracy like this to advance a position that could not be justified other than by appeal to religion. It would be very wrong, and frankly, I don't believe there is any serious Catholic politician in Australia who has ever done that.
That's correct.
Not in recent times.
No, and we're in agreement on that.
Let's move on a little bit. We have another question from down the front here, and it's from Amanda Fairweather, and it touches on some of these issues.
Hi, I'm a medical student who has a really keen interest in global health issues, and I'm really proud to live in a country where we choose to give of our tax dollars to the developing world. What I want to know is, why are we giving money that should be going to help saving people's lives to third world abortions? Now, why should tax dollars go towards this when this goes against the conscience of so many Australians? And there are other methods, other measures that are so much more effective, so much cheaper, such as birthing kits and training up midwives, that don't go against the conscience of a lot of Australians. Why are we using tax dollars on third world abortions now?
Kate Ellis.
Well, I guess the answer to that is, you said that you're proud to live in a country where our aid money goes towards saving people's lives. And this is an important part of that in these countries we actually need to be investing in reproductive health, in fertility treatments, in a whole range of giving people choice. In regards to your tax dollars, the simple reality of a democracy is that you don't always agree with everything that your tax dollars were spent on. My tax dollars were spent on millions and millions of dollars in work choices advertising. I don't agree with that. And I guess the thing is that...
segue.
Yeah. I'm trying, Tony, but...
Let's go.
So I guess it's really important that whatever your views are, that we fund a whole range of important initiatives in the countries where our aid program is delivered. Now, for far too long, I think that we have been having a blind ban on even looking at what some of the needs on the ground might be there, and what we've done is lifted that. So it means that there is a freedom to have a look at what aid dollars are needed, what programs are needed down there, and if that includes looking at reproductive health, then I think that's a good and a positive thing.
But I think reproductive health is a euphemism here for abortion.
Well,
and let's be blunt about what we're talking about here. And without going into the rights and wrongs of the abortion question, I just think that surely there are higher priorities for Australia than funding things like that.
We're funding contraception, and then we have abortion if the contraception fails. It's a package.
Yeah, well, as I said, in the great scheme of things, we have limited aid dollars. Is this really what we feel most proud of Australia for supporting?
Okay.
And
All
I
right.
certainly think we can do better than that.
Actually, can I just hear from Peter Kennedy on this, because you still are functioning as a Catholic priest?
Yes, Tony, I suppose I am.
He can't be unordained. He can just be taken out of his parish, as I understand it.
I can be
Yes, the Spanish Inquisition was a while ago.
I would have been burned at the stake by now. This is probably not going to answer the question, but again, the Catholic Church in the Philippines, because they're so strong, because the bishops are so strong, such power over, because mostly they're Catholic, there are no abortion clinics in the Philippines. So many women who have 6, 7, 8, 9 children, and then they don't believe that they can possibly support another child, they have an abortion in a backyard abortion clinic. It's the hypocrisy really of the church in not allowing that freedom to women, if that's their choice, in places like the Philippines, in very Catholic countries.
I'm going to just move on, because we actually have a question that's come in. It's actually come in as we've been speaking, and it's a web question from Marianne Mukatu of Sydney. As more and more young people become increasingly exposed to sexual themes and images, do you think a national celibacy campaign would be helpful to counter the rise in teen sexual activities, sexual infections and pregnancies? Kate Ellis.
Volunteer, Kate.
There are so many responses that I'm going to veer well away from on that. But
could you see yourself as the face of a national celibacy campaign?
Can I get back to that question? I have no ambition to be the face of any national advertising campaign, is the only way I'm going to sidestep that one.
It would work like this. I'm Kate Ellis, I've given up sex and I'm happier for it. This is an authorised message from the Australian government.
I think Kevin would do better at that.
I was... Getting back to the question, you just made me blush, Tony Jones. Look, I think it's really important. I think it's really important that we are talking to young Australians about sex, and that we're talking to them about their options, and that we're making sure that young Australians have the confidence and the self-esteem to know that that they're free to say, no, we don't want to do that. And so I think that should be part of an overall sex education package, absolutely.
Tony, but you did have a shot at celibacy,
a
brief one, but
and
you muffed it.
I failed. I saw the dark, Tony. So, look, like Kate, I think that it's very important that we empower people to reject this kind of rampant sensuality.
There's already rampant sexuality.
Look, you only have to drive down the streets of Sydney, to see these billboards for sex aids.
Well, we should do something about
like
them.
Well,
yes.
look, the point is we do live in a highly sexualised society, and I don't want to sound like a wowser, and I don't think I am one, but I do think.
Good laugh. Does anyone out there think Tony Abbott's a wowser? It's quite a few hands up
geez,
there.
yeah. Okay, as many people who think you're a sex symbol, Tony.
We've actually got a question. That gentleman's had his hand up for a while. Let's hear.
Yeah, this is actually for Bettina. You've been studying sex for a while. What effect do you think the doctrines like the ones the Catholic Church have been proposing and implementing have had on sexual culture among youth and everybody?
Well, not very much. But I just want to come back to that previous question, if I may, because the point is that there hasn't been a huge change in sexual activity of teenagers. There's been a slight shift in terms of people doing certain things a little bit earlier. But, most kids who leave school are still virgins, and people don't believe that. There's so many slight changes. So we're not seeing an enormous impact in terms of, people madly bonking everywhere at some extraordinary age. And our society is shifting slightly, but not enormously, although I agree it's a more sexualised culture. And I would love to do something about those dreadful billboards advertising dubious treatment for male impotence, which are totally ripping men off.
Awful.
But that's a different issue.
OK, we actually have another question on a related subject from the audience. It's from Robert Hickey.
Well, on a lighter note, does Bettina Arndt give any credence to the adage that men play at love to get sex, while women play at sex to get love?
No, that's sweet.
Bettina.
Well, of course, is...
You said that was sweet.
That is sweet. But it's at the heart of my new book, in a sense.
Hey, you can't advertise on the ABC.
No, because I'm looking at the differences in males and females and how, unfortunately, there is this very big gap between the way men and women approach sex and the fact that...
Thank goodness.
It's not thank goodness if it causes enormous tension in relationships and people to be really unhappy about it. So women have very different expectations about the conditions they need for sex, and unfortunately women are the ones who are generally controlling the sex supply in relationships. So if they don't feel they're getting enough love, roses, wooing, whatever, they are putting on the brakes. And I have spent the last 2 years listening to what it's like to be a man who's constantly rejected in bed. And that is a huge... You're laughing?
You haven't listened to me, Bettina.
But it is an enormous issue out there. And so part of it is this difference between men and women and their perceptions of what are the conditions they want for sex.
Bruce Warpy.
I can't possibly.
Oh, you can reflect on your own personal circumstances if you like.
How men and women approach each other through all the ages is poetry, roses, vodka. No. And so we should get back to the alcohol discussion.
Well, actually, I'll throw the same question to Peter Kennedy because it may be one for the confessional, but surely you get to speak to a lot of people about sexual issues, whether it's in the confessional or not.
Well, you don't hear confessions much anymore, Tony. But I do think, again, if we're talking from the point of view of the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church needs to move out of the bedrooms of people and maybe instead of moralising all the time and telling people about their sexual lives, like what Bettina just said, there hasn't been much difference really in many years now. But the Church continues, it's sort of so hung up on sex. And people of my generation particularly, we suffered enormous guilt and scrupulosity. I can say that for myself, because of the Church's teachings on sex. And they need to sort of just stop moralising and talk more about things like intimacy and love than about sex itself.
Peter, of course you're right on this. You are absolutely right. But that doesn't mean that what the Church has traditionally taught is not at least an ideal worth aspiring to. Let's accept that most people much of the time are not going to be able to live up to it. But nevertheless, I think it is an ideal that's worth...
But an ideal which they impose under the pain of sin. under the pain of mortal sin.
But you don't do that to your parishioners, and frankly, I have never met a priest from Cardinal Pell down who doesn't take a pastoral approach to these things.
Okay, we have another question in the audience. It comes from Melissa Ran.
Hi, my question is directed at Bettina. In the media articles reporting on your new book, The Sex Diaries, yes, so I did it for you. They tend to report that you summarize the general advice for women who are experiencing low sex drive to just do it, even if they don't feel like it or they don't want to. Does it sound particularly controversial to you, especially the suggestion that somehow women should force themselves to have sex? It seems as if it's their duty if they want to save their marriage.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm not suggesting women lie back and think of England and suffer through it. I'm suggesting that the person with a low sex drive who's less interested and is constantly rejecting their partner has an obligation to just do it, to incorporate sex in their loving relationship. And it should be one of the obligations you have in a relationship, and it doesn't matter whether it's the man or the woman. But I'm not saying it's about suffering. I'm saying that often women can, in fact, if they put the canoe in the water and start paddling, they will just, even though they didn't feel like having sex to start off with, they will find that they can enjoy it. That's one of the things we've only learnt recently through new sex research, that there are many women who don't need desire in order to enjoy sex. So it's a very important, you have to get your head in the right place and you have to be with the right man who does the right things, but then you may actually enjoy it. And that's a really important thing to leave open as a possibility in your relationship. That's what I'm saying, not just to women, but to men.
Let's hear from another woman, Kate Ellis. Just do it is what Bettina Arndt is suggesting to married women. Good advice, bad advice? What do you think?
Oh, well, clearly I'm not a sex therapist, as Bettina is, but I think that you have to be really careful about generalising, and I think that different people put the canoe in the water as a result of different circumstances, and there might be, different blockages on the boat ramp. I'm not sure how long I can go with this for, but I think that in relationships they differ very much from one relationship to another. What's going on? What are the underlying factors? And they need to be explored as an individual relationship, which I'm sure Bettina would argue, but I just would be very hesitant to say just do it and say that it was as simple as that.
Tony Abbott.
Well, I'm not sure that that's what Bettina did say.
No. I'm not suggesting that.
And
that was my question.
This is an extraordinarily difficult area, I'm just trying to write an obituary of Ron Conway, the psychologist and social critic who's just died. And Ron said in his autobiography that, after thousands and thousands of counselling sessions with people, the two subjects which seem to most concern people, and I suppose most trouble their psyches, are basically sex and God, religion and intimate relationships, and they carry so much freight, and I think there does need to be give and take on both sides, and this idea that sex is kind of a woman's right to absolutely withhold, just as the idea that sex is a man's right to demand. I think that they both need to be moderated, so to speak.
Bruce Wolpe.
I think anything that, I admire what you do a lot, anything that helps redress the imbalance between love and work, where we can, somehow we can't live without work, but we can sometimes live without love for too long, is good. And so and to have a discussion and to have people think about the balance in their lives and how to pursue it better. The pursuit of happiness was a great American revolution, and that's what this is all about.
Okay, I said this was all about sex, politics and religion, yes. But we need to get back to politics, and we've actually got a very different question. It comes from Arvind Modi.
Yes, it's a very simple question, actually. What does the panel think of Barack Obama so far? Very simple question.
Bruce Wolpe, let's start with you. You've got a bit of a vested interest here. As we know, you're about to go back and essentially join the Obama administration.
I'll be working in the Congress and with the committee responsible for a lot of Obama's legislative program. I think it's a very important time in American history, and it comes about rarely, where one cycle ends, this election ended Reaganism, and a new progressive era may be about to be underway. I've been in America twice since January, just before the inauguration, and then about a week or so ago in Washington. And what I found is not unlike what I'm reading about in the book Nothing to Fear by Adam Cohen, another plug for another book, about Roosevelt's first 100 days. And you have an infusion of people with a sense of wanting to take the country and make America better again and fix the ills that have gripped the country both economically, as far as its standing in the world, and the faith of the American people in their government. And I think this is underway, and it's not an ideological moment, but it's really a time where people are trying to come together to solve problems and make a great country great again.
Surely it must be an ideological moment. I mean, there seems to be an enormous ideological shift in the country from no, we don't want the government involved to the government has to do everything.
Well, no, I think you're seeing a lot of, I think it's pragmatism, that we have an enormous economic mess. So there are many, many things thrown at it to fix it. And I think it's rationalism. What are the, not the limits of power, but where can power be applied to do good for society? And you see people, you have the first African-American president. It's transforming the culture of the country as far as how Americans relate to each other in ways they don't even understand yet. And I think that's all to the good. So I think it's a moment of great opportunity and hope. And you feel it here in Australia. People, I was at a dinner, Tony, just a couple weeks before the election with a group of New South Wales Liberal politicians. Most of them wanted Obama to win the election because they thought it would make America better, and a stronger America is good for the world. But not a radical left-wing America that's just out on the fringes, but a force for good and idealism again, and the values that we share together across both countries.
Tony Abbott.
Well, look, there is no doubt there was just a wave of euphoria at the election of the first black president, and he is obviously a man of great promise.
Very gifted.
In the end, there are no magic wands you can wave, though, to deal with these problems. And while I want Obama to succeed, I think he's going to struggle with these issues just as poor old George W. Bush struggled with them. And I really worry about this idea that you can spend your way out of a recession. I think it's wrong. And I think that because Obama is so charismatic, you've got a whole lot of Obama groupies now, like Kevin Rudd, who are trying to do the same thing, and I just don't think it's going to work.
No, the first thing that Franklin Roosevelt did in the 30s was stabilize the banks, but then the second thing he did was almost balance the budget. It prolonged the recession. I think people understand... FDR. I think...
That's not the New Deal.
It ultimately became the New Deal because he ultimately had to adopt Keynes and have enormous resources injected into the economy. And I believe that over time, there will be traction on the economy from everything that's being put into it, and there will be a recovery.
Okay, let's hear from Kate Ellis. The Prime Minister, in fact, is going over to Washington to meet Obama face-to-face next week.
Which is obviously hugely important. It's a hugely important relationship for Australia. But also I think that when you have a look at the excitement around the Obama administration and his election, yeah, of course some of it was because it's history. It is the first African American president. But it's also because something else that's really important happened, and that was moving past the politics of fear and negativity to actually start engaging in ideas and talking about getting out there and doing things differently and making a difference. And I think that that's hugely exciting, but also really inspiring, and something that in Australia, I think the community are ready for us to do just that, to move past fear and actually talk about moving forward. Sorry, what was that?
I said move past fear to cliche.
Oh, well, you call it a cliche. I think that ideas are important, but I also think action's important. And so it's important that the Prime Minister is going over there. It's an important relationship. And we know that in the midst of this international crisis, the only way that we're going to get the solution we need is through international solutions. So absolutely, I get behind the Prime Minister and get behind the President and hope that they come up with some great solutions, because we know that a global solution's required. So you might think that's a cliche. I think that's a solution, and it's really important, and something I wish the opposition would get behind rather than just being negative about it.
A brief reply.
It's much better to come up with solutions than just to wish for them. And the problem is the solutions are difficult. And these guys run away from difficult solutions.
How many solutions is the opposition putting forward, Tony? How many solutions are you putting forward as you vote no on everything that we're putting forward as we try and support Australian jobs? Where are your solutions?
We have said that we'd bring forward the tax cuts. We would try to take the burdens off business by reducing the superannuation guarantee levy, by reducing payroll tax. We would try to do something for the people who actually generate jobs in this country, because that's the problem. We've got too many people who are frightened to offer jobs. The last thing we'd be doing is putting a new green tax on everything, and the last thing we'd be doing is winding the clock back to the 1970s with this job-destroying workplace relations law of yours.
Because you're still the party of work choices, isn't it?
We're the party of political honesty, and we don't like the way you have gone way ahead of your mandate on workplace relations.
Well, I so want to respond to that.
A brief response, you can.
Well, I just want to say that if you are the party of political honesty, why don't you just come forward and say we still believe in work choices? Because you weren't being honest when Malcolm Turnbull came out and said work choices is dead, and now you will not vote with us so that we can ensure that work choices is indeed dead, and we can all move forward with the new system that we got a mandate at the last election to introduce.
I mean, when you got that so-called mandate, there has been a very big shift in the economic climate since then, which would suggest that maybe it's not the right time to put more of a burden on employers.
I'm going to interrupt here because we did have a question, and Bruce started answering very briefly. Bruce, are you worried at all Obama could be overwhelmed by the sheer weight of this economic disaster?
No, I'm not, because I think Obama is dead, and I think the country will not solve its problems unless it tackles all of its problems. They are interrelated. Health, energy, and the economy need to be solved together. It's a special moment where, in fact, you can do that precisely because the size of the problems are so large. People are thinking that we need new paradigms to deal with them, and they're being created. I also think, in listening to this conversation, there's an echo chamber of it right in the Congress. And I think people are impatient with hard and fast partisan positions, and they want parties to get together in a pragmatic way to solve problems that are larger than all of us. And I think it's time really for people to draw together, find common ground, and do it. Obama got no Republican votes for a stimulus plan in the House, 3 in the Senate. I think the American people want better, and I think I've lived in Australia 18 years. And I think when you have a special moment like this, where the problems are imported, this economic problem came from the United States of America. It wasn't caused here in Australia, but the effects are profound. Unemployment's going up. And I think people really want the political system to respond by finding some common cause. And I think
I'm going to stop you there, because we've actually now managed to end where we started, a question about common ground. And that's where we'll have to leave it for tonight. It's all we have time for. So please thank our panellists, Father Peter Kennedy, Kate Ellis, Bruce Wolpe, Bettina Arndt and Tony Abbott. And join us next week. We'll be broadcasting Q&A live from Melbourne with the Minister for Communications, Stephen Conroy, the Shadow Minister for Climate Change, Greg Hunt, provocative columnist Andrew Bolt, publisher Louise Adler and Muslim academic Susan Carlin. So go to our website at abc.net.au/Q&A, send us your web and video questions, and don't forget we're looking for mashups, that is short satirical videos to show on the program. You can upload them onto our website, and here is one of them. It comes from Glenn Optenbrow of Liverpool, New South Wales. Good night.
We will oppose the Alco Pops tax.
Sing it!
Will oppose poorly designed emissions trading scheme.
You got mud on your face, big disgrace. Somebody better put your bag into your place. We will
oppose
cash splash. Sing it! We will
oppose Rudd Bank